he seemed so blue, so I said my name. I looked into his eyes, he started to cry, so I asked him why, and he said, I heard the truth was in my roots, but I haven't seen a tree all day. I didn't understand who was this man, so I tried to ask again, and he said, what about the leaves on trees with broken branches? Where will they go after they've done their dances in the wind? Will they cry or simply die? Why won't you fly away? Fly away. I was so confused, I couldn't choose the title of his blues. So in response to his news, I looked at his shoes and noticed they were mine. Hold up, rewind. The voice was in my head, telling stories of the dead. All my life I've been misled to think that slavery was over. Now the world is on my shoulders, asking me, what about the leaves on trees with broken branches? Where will they go after they've done their dances in the wind? Will they cry or simply die? Why won't you fly away? Fly away. The moral of the story is before you chase your glory, you better know your roots, they hold the truth. The real sun is in the sky, giving life all day to fertile ground. The moral of the story is before you chase your glory, you better know your roots, they hold the truth. The real sun is in the sky, giving life all day to fertile ground. So I ask you, what about the leaves on trees with broken branches? Where will they go after they've done their dances in the wind? Will they cry or simply die? Why won't you fly away? Fly away. What about the leaves on trees with broken branches? Where will they go after they've done their dances in the wind? Will they cry or simply die? Why won't you fly away? Fly away. 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 I was walking down the street one day when I heard this voice say, who are you? He seemed so blue, so I said my name. I looked into his eyes, he started to cry, so I asked him why, and he said, I heard the truth was in my roots, but I haven't seen a tree all day. I didn't understand who was this man, so I tried to ask again, and he said, what about the leaves on trees with broken branches? Where will they go after they've done their dances in the wind? Will they cry or simply die? Why won't you fly away?
right. Peace and love, everybody. Peace and blessings to you. Welcome to Moments with Malik, episode number 4. In this brand new experiment. And we're putting this thing together still. And the more energy and effort that I put behind it, the more dedication that I put behind it, the better it grows. All right. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining me again tonight. This is Wednesday, February the 18th, 2026. And we are already in the middle of February. It just seemed like, within a wink of an eye or blink of an eye, we were celebrating the new year. Now we are 1.5 months down for 2026. But anyway, again, thank you all for being a part of this experience tonight. I do have a lot to go through, and I need to take my time to make sure that everything that I am presenting tonight is comprehensive. I will go through a series of slides. I'll read from 3 books, or actually 4. No, 3. And play some videos. Yeah, I hope my stream is good. I hope it's not choppy, because I did not, usually when I do my streams, before I do that, I kind of reboot my router and clear out any junk that might be lingering around in the router, so that I can have a clean connection. But I didn't get a chance to do that. I've been running around, still putting this together, putting the presentation together, sorting out my thoughts and how I want to have the night's show flow. So, topic: ultra processed people, the miseducation of the Caucasian to uphold the lie of white supremacy. Long topic, long title. And I put efforts into this so that once it's done, once I finish this case, once I finish this argument, that you won't have any doubt of the premise that I put together and how it's being supported. But before I get into that, sometimes I do watch videos quite frequently on different platforms, particularly probably the most platform that I listen to or watch videos on is YouTube. And sometimes like people, when they were doing when they had cable TV, they would do channel surfing, things like that, just to kind of hopefully run into a program that caught their eye, that looked interesting or seemed interesting. They would come in and they would land on that channel, and that's where they would stay. Well, I sometimes I do the same thing with YouTube. And this past week, I was just doing some surfing, and I ran across a channel that was the topic was how do you make things, and this particular video was how do you make incense, which I thought was interesting because the last episode of episode 41 of the health walk, I went into the rituals and things that African people, we as people were accustomed to doing. And one of the things that we would normally do on a regular basis when we do rituals, whether we're doing meditation, whether we're doing libation, whatever it is that we're doing. Incense is a big part of that. Burning incense is a big part of that, and that ritual is something that is prevalent in cultures all across the entire globe. So I thought it was interesting because I read up on how incense were made, but it also gave a bit of a history of why incense are burned. And I filed it away and put it in my file cabinet for maybe for later use. If I have to explain certain rituals, I can always fall back on that video. But anyway, that's just an icebreaker. Um, so how did I come to this title? What led me to this title? Ultra processed people. I was going over things that I can discuss on moments with Malik that were kind of being tied into, as I said, history, metaphysics, health, and one of the topics that I was going to present on the health walk was talking about processed foods because I talked about processed foods last year when I was dealing with minerals on Earth. You have to forgive me because I can't remember what that episode was. But you go out in the archives, you'll see not ultra processed foods, but minerals on Earth. So I went just a little bit into the effects of eating ultra processed foods in their standard American diet. So I wanted to expound on that topic, so I purchased some text that where I can do some research in. And one of the texts, the title of the text was called "Ultra Processed People," and the book was titled that way because the author was conveying how in this um, standard American diet and the foods that we eat is highly processed, and in those um, routines of eating or those habits of eating these highly processed foods, we in turn become highly processed people. And I gave it some thought, and I said, when that's we're dealing with just the physical um, components or the physical results of eating um, processed foods and how plays a role in our health. Whether it's a detriment to our health eating these highly processed foods or ultra processed foods. But before we even get to uh, the physical effects of it and um, the addiction to eating those foods, there has to you go through the step process of enticing people through the mind or through the spirit of wanting to eat these ultra processed foods. So remember, everything is a step down. It comes through our spirit. First, it comes through our spirit, then to our mind, and then it eventually makes its way into our physical. The physical body is uh, what follows behind the energy of the spirit and the energy of the mind. So I said there has to be a process that takes place that before you are enticed and become addicted to these ultra processed foods, and you're consuming these ultra processed foods, something has to work on the mind or on the spirit that will make groups of people or individuals who want to engage in this type of behavior. So I said, okay, well, what could that be? Well, the overall factor would be how well are they educated in order for them to want to indulge or become addicted or indulged and addicted to come and succumb to the succumb to the bad diet of eating ultra processed food. So something has to work on the mind in order for to do that. And the factor, the common factor in all that would be how poorly are the people educated. Because in order for someone to want to dump loads and loads of sugar into their system, um, on a daily basis, say for instance, you're addicted to, or you like drinking sodas, Cokes, Pepsis, whatever it is your flavor of choice. You have to believe that what it is that you're doing doesn't have an effect on you. Whereas for each 12-ounce can of soda, pop, soda pop, however way you define it, whatever you call it, for every 12-ounce bottle or 12-ounce can, there is 16, I think it's 16 teaspoons, 16 teaspoons of sugar. And can you imagine that amount of sugar being dumped, processed sugar being dumped into your system with each can of soda that you drink? And we don't just drink one can of soda a day on habit. Most of us are drinking, probably knocking down maybe 4 or 5 sodas within an 8 to 12 hour period or per day. So you multiply that by 16 teaspoons of sugar, and then you see how many teaspoons of sugar that you are consuming, which eventually will begin to erode your entire system. So the only way that you would even want to allow yourself to be manipulated to do something like that is this if you were poorly educated. So that also includes, if you're poorly educated about diet, that must mean that you're poorly educated about some other things too. Well, this topic this evening is how poorly are Caucasians educated about the true history of this country. Now, we know if you look at or read Dr. Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro, we know that we were miseducated through this public school system. And we're finding ways to be able to re-educate ourselves and realign ourselves with our true history about who we are and who we were as a people. So many of our scholars have made efforts and have been dedicated to tell the true story about who we are as African people, because, if you go to school and you are being taught U.S. history, the topic or the start of that topic in Black history, which they carve out in 28 days in the month of February, the topic starts off as Black people being enslaved, but not even, they don't even use the terminology as enslaved. They say Black people were slaves, period, which means that this is who we are perpetually, or who we have been perpetually, indicating that that's all we've been and that's all will always be, are slaves. But when you begin to dig into how and when these stories begin to unfold and find its way into the educational system, you will find that this information was all designed to mislead the people based upon a psychopathic campaign orchestrated by a group of white men. Now, if you've been following me over the last few episodes, you know that there was a definition that I created called white psychopathy. And by the way, let me just pull this slide up real quick, because I've gotten just a tad ahead of myself. No, I didn't. Let me pull the slide up. So I wanted to give a definition of, first of all, what is process? So we say process is having been subjected to a special series of actions that produce something from the original, or that leads to a particular result. So you start with something that is the original and you process it over and over again, and then it becomes highly unrecognizable from its original source. You take, for instance, when you go and I'm going to lean on sugar. You take sugar from the sugar cane, which gets processed over and over again until you get to the level of refined white sugar, or there's other forms of sugar in the liquid form that if you went back to the original sugar cane, you would never know that this sugar cane produced what is one of the most poisonous and addictive substance on the planet. But that took place through processing. So through decades and decades and centuries of miseducating the truth about history and the relationship to us as a people here in this country and throughout the entire world, you had decades and centuries of people being miseducated about who Black people are and the atrocities that we suffered throughout our existence here in this country, and also in the Caribbeans and in South America as well, and not to leave out the atrocities that had taken place on the African continent. Well, hell, some of us don't even believe that we're African. Some of the stuff that's out there on YouTube, it's not YouTube, on TikTok, question very highly. I'm like, where are these people getting their research from? I'm like, gosh. But it seems like everyone's repeating something that somebody else said without having be able to validate the information that they are irresponsibly repeating on these airways. But I digress. So process is having been subjected to a special series of actions that produce something from the original or that leads to a particular result. Peace and love, peace and blessings to you, nephew. Thank you for showing up, for being, again, part of this this evening. Anyone else that's here that's I'm not familiar with or hasn't introduced themselves or hasn't given me a shout out, please let me know who you are so I can give you your propers and thank you for being a part of the show tonight. So moving on. So what is white psychopathy? And I'm going to continue to promote this definition every opportunity I get. So white psychopathy is a pathology susceptible to white men. The pathology is defined as a mental illness where some white men, not all, I have to make that distinction, not all. Some white men believe within the confines of the made-up construct of race that white men are superior to all other people on the planet. Under this pathology, white men believe that they were given all dominative rights by their God to rule and have control over all other people on the planet through the means of money, economics, politics, education, law, or force. And what I mean by force, I mean war. So that's always the option of war is always on the table for these people. So how do I get here and how do I support this argument? Well, first of all, let me just open this up. When was the Super Bowl? 2 weeks ago? Yeah, the 8th. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Well, I don't watch Super Bowl. I haven't watched the Super Bowl in years. I hardly even watch football at all now because it's become a distraction. I'm sorry. It's become a political, I don't want to say a juggernaut, but it has become the owners of the CEOs of these teams, and I'm calling them owners. The CEOs of these teams have used their power and their might and their economic might to be able to influence politics and how politics are flowing in this country. If you remember how they were able to quell down the movement that had been taking place with Colin Kaepernick back in 2016, 2017, whenever that was. They were threatening, of course, they threatened the man with, having him being forced out of the league, and they were manipulating and controlling the narrative that was being broadcast. They were twisting this. They allowed the stories themselves to be twisted. They allowed the information to be misconstrued by those who had, again, no historical reference to why this brother was doing what he was doing. And this is what I mean by the miseducation of the Caucasian. So in the halftime show for the Super Bowl this year, they had a halftime show by an artist by the name of Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny is Puerto Rican, born and raised in Puerto Rico. Richport is what that stands for. Thank you, beloved. 2016. Thank you, nephew. So he did the entire show in his tongue, and I'm not going to call it a native tongue. It's not his tongue that he was doing, that he did the halftime show in. It was his colonized tongue that he did the halftime show in, Spanish. Spanish is not indigenous to the Caribbean islands, which is also a colonized name, but it is not a tongue that is indigenous to the people or the original inhabitants of those people who lived there, who once lived there, who were colonized. Spanish is a Latin language that comes from Europe. So you had miseducated, misguided, arrogant people on platforms and on different news media outlets talking about, all in their feelings, saying that why is he doing this show in Spanish? I don't want to listen to this brown man doing a halftime show in Spanish. He should be doing it in English. Well, Spanish is a European language. But now, because you have been poorly educated, you associate this European Latin language with brown folk who live in central parts of the Americas and southern parts of the Americas. By the way, let's stop the BS about these people who are in central and southern parts of this continent here, and even in the northern part above the United States. Let's stop the bullshit about them not being Americans. It's called South America. It's called Central America. It's called North America, and within North America comprises the United States of America. So all of them, by definition, are Americans. They may not be U.S. Americans, but they are all Americans. And if you want to do some history of how those landmass got its name as the Americas, go do some research on Amerigo Vespucci. But these people lost their shit because this brother, I'll call him brother, from Puerto Rico, did the entire halftime show in his colonized tongue called Spanish. And it's not his indigenous language. It's his colonized tongue. But because they aren't even cognizant of their own history, they had this large protest about, and this large disdain about this man doing the halftime show in Spanish. And that's what I mean by they've been poorly educated or miseducated. And what did Trump say? I love the poorly educated. That's how, again, that's how he, low key, that's how he ended up in the White House. Because you had a bunch of uneducated people who voted for him. So let's step into this. In this text, the Iceman in Heritage, Michael Bradley, he laid his research down where he, a white man, Caucasian, had the audacity to tell the truth and pissed off a lot of people in the process. This book was recommended by one of our ancestors who was teaching African Studies, Dr. Clark, teaching African Studies. I think it was in Rutgers. I think he was doing it. He was teaching African Studies, Africana Studies in Rutgers. He was teaching Africana Studies in another college in New York, and I can't recall the name of it. And he was, I think he was also in City College in New York as well. So they were all teaching Africana Studies, but this book came highly recommended by him. And just to start things off, I'm going to read real quickly what Michael Bradley had to say. So he says, I believe that I can show that our converging contemporary crisis like racism itself have their origins in the prehistory of white race alone. We attribute various threats to our survival to man's folly. But this is a conscious and self-protecting euphemism. Nuclear war, environmental pollution, resource rate are all primary threats to our survival and are all the results of peculiarity of Caucasian behavior. Caucasoid values, Caucasoid psychology. Of course, let me repeat that. Peculiar Caucasoid behavior, Caucasoid values, and Caucasoid psychology. And I don't have my glasses, my reading glasses on, and I'm not intending to put my reading glasses on because it's too much of a hassle to read and take them off, put on, I can see well enough to be able to get through this. But if you find me stumbling on some words, just know that it's the me trying to focus on this small print. But anyway, because I have contacts, and contacts are supposed to be able to be utilized for distance view sight, which also kind of squeezes down the print for up close as well. So there is no way to avoid the truth. The problem with the world is white men. If this insight had generally escaped us, it is only because we Caucasoids have dictated much history, written most of it, and judged it in terms of our own self-image, but we have never looked at ourselves in an objective biological mirror. So he goes on to say, our racial psychology has brought the world to the brink of disaster. We therefore have some obligation to attempt to correct matters, and there isn't much time. The task is hopeless vanity. The obligation is betrayed if we are unwilling to try to know ourselves. Even if we undertake racial psychoanalysis in good faith, difficulties arise. There are so many defense mechanisms designed to obscure the profile of our Caucasoid racial personality. For instance, one of the most potent contemporary defense mechanisms is the existence of liberal anthropology. The tendency of modern anthropology is to deny the very concept of race. It is a position most vehemently articulated by Ashley Montague, which was a anthropologist, along with other contemporary writers. I would argue that the denial of racial behavioral differences is at best a Greek gift that serves to cloak our true nature. The denial of race and racial proclivities is a mechanism to disguise the white race proclivity for racism. As a defense mechanism, the denial of racial differences is potent in our time because so many people eagerly embrace it, more as an article of faith than a reasoned position. But although Montague and allied writers have welded together a strongly supported tenet of modern liberalism, the strength of the anti-race posture is the strength of many. Quantity, not quality. The denial of race and racial proclivities, like most faith, is vulnerable to facts. Unfortunately for the credibility of modern liberalism and contemporary anthropology, truth is still enshrined by facts and not by consensus, no matter how well intentioned. We will look at the facts. Other defense mechanisms are more formidable because they boast at least a grain of truth. The grain is magnified in the lens of racial vanity until the small peck appears to eclipse the whole. Our perspective is distorted, our values deranged, our reflection is cosmetized. That's Michael Bradley, and I have a few more paragraphs that I'm going to read throughout the night. That is chapter 1 in The Iceman's Inheritance. So what is he saying? That racism was created based upon a construct of an idea that was that came about in the minds of white men, where they eventually perpetuated the belief in the idea of themselves being superior to everyone else. Well, if we are looking at the history or the historical record, we would know that prior to the 18th century, 1700s, there was nothing identified as race. As I said in my definition, for white psychopathy, race is a made-up construct. It wasn't anything that was in the original language of any of those who were communicating in different forms of tongue, whether it would be in the Germanic tongue or the Latin tongue, the European languages. And we know that it wasn't in anyone's language in the indigenous cultures that were eventually found themselves being colonized by Europeans. So the terminology race was created for the sole purpose of being able to create a hierarchy of white men versus those who were underneath of them. This is what was going on psychopathically in their mind. Looking at Carl von Linnaeus. And if you are familiar with Dr. Joy DeGrew's book, Post-Traumatic Slavery Syndrome, and shout out to her because there was a load of research that I did and looked at her videos, some of the videos that she did, and of course reading through her text, helped her contribute to this lecture for tonight, or this lesson tonight, not a lecture, but this lesson tonight, this show tonight. So Carl von Linnaeus was the first person to classify race. His classification of race was identified in this way. And excuse me while I comb through my notes. So Carl Linnaeus identified 4 races of people. And the races of people were identified not by phenotype. He wasn't an anthropologist, so he did not identify them by phenotype. Physiological appearances, he identified them by landmass. Knowing that, if you understand anything about history, you would know that the undisputable fact now is that the original man and woman was on the African continent. So he classified 4 groups of people based upon their historical presence after the migration out of Africa. So you had 4 landmass. So he identified homo just means man, homo, man, Americanus, which is, of course, the Americas. Now, mind you, this landmass wasn't called the Americas until Amerigo Vespucci landed in Florida, which is now identified and known as Florida. This area wasn't known as Americanus. So these were Latinized names that he was using to make this identification or classification on race. Homo Americanus happened to be the Americas. So who was living here in the Americas? The indigenous people, we call the First Nation people, or the Native Americans, or what other names that they identify with. And of course, the racial epithet that they were or historically came to be known as Indians. So they were comprised of those who were in what is the territory of Canada, which is the territory of these so-called United States. The central part of this landmass that is identified as Central America and South America, those were all indigenous native people who were red or brown skinned people, which included some admixture of African people as well. Because if you look at, or if you are familiar with Dr. Van Sertima's book, We Came Before Columbus, you would know that African people were sailing back and forth the Atlantic Ocean long before they even knew who a person called Christopher Columbus even was. David Imhotep's book as well, African people were the first Americans. He did, that was a doctoral program that he put together. He actually wrote the first theses on this subject and received his PhD. Do some research in those two texts. But anyway, I digress. Homo Europaeus is the landmass that is identified as Europe. Now, Europe is It's very strange, very peculiar. Europe itself is, within itself, is an island. The regions that are from parts of uh, Greece, and everything east of that landmass is all Asia. At one time, they called Europe Asia. Europe was at one point called Asia Minor. There was Asia Minor and there was Asia Major. If anyone or is familiar with it, what was being taught in history class, there was no such thing as Europe. It was Asia Minor and Asia Major. Minor consisted of those European Germanic tribes that are now identified as the British, the French, the Italians, the Scots, the Irish, all the rest of them, Scandinavians, all the rest of them. So that was what he identified as Homo Europaeus. Homo Asiaticus was part of everything, as I mentioned, going east of Asia Minor, which included Greece, and included the so-called Middle East dialects, which was Babylon, Syria, Assyria. Did I say Palestine? Arabia, and of course the Chinese and Chinese offspring, which Chinese, and which also included those areas that went further down, and also India. Those were all considered as Homo Asiaticus. The fourth one was what he had classified as Homo Ep4. Now you can guess just by the name itself, we know that was African or Africa. But he had some very racist terms that he applied to these different groups outside of Europeans. Of course, he saw Europeans as the creme de la creme, the upper echelon of the human evolution. And he identified or saw African people as the bottom scale or the bottom rung. So this is what he had to say about African people. This is what Linnaeus said. Black people were identified or classified as Homo Ep4, who their description was black, phlegmatic, which meant unemotional or calm, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice, which is a sudden and unaccountable change of mood or behavior. That's how they identified. That's how the language that he had placed in his classification, that's how he identified us. Now, we know that there wasn't any empirical research done, any observation done, any field study done to make these determinations. He just went off emotion. But his emotional descriptive behavior, descriptions of these different classifications went into what was supposed to be scholarly text. And this is what people were being learned from or being taught from. Again, the miseducation of the Caucasian. So then after Linnaeus comes along with his classification, pardon me. Next comes along a person by the name of Comte de Buffon, de Buffon, de Buffon. And this is what he had to say. I'm gonna read this. Let me read this from page 32 first. Let me take this down because I don't want to spoil the fun. Page 32. This is Comte. This is what he had to say. This is in The Iceman's Inheritance. The word race itself was introduced into scientific literature by Buffon in his, now this is in French, so I want to get this translation right. I'm gonna have to put the slide back up because I think I had it in the slide. No, I have it written down. Okay. The natural history, general and particular, with the description of the king's cabinet. So this was actually an encyclopedia that he had put together, and this definition was created in 1749. So again, it's the national history, general and particular, with the description of the king's cabinet. And this is what he had to say based upon his scholarly research and literary prowess. The word race itself was introduced into scientific literature by Buffon. It was in 1749. And he uses the term in a very general sense to mean kind of variety. And after he put this definition of race together, remember I said prior to the 18th century, there was no such thing as race. There was no word to define what race was until Europeans put together these ideas in their head to separate the different peoples on the planet based upon appearances. Again, there wasn't any scientific research, whether you can use scientific very loosely or not, because even here they were saying this is scientific literature, which it wasn't. They weren't doing any scientific research to make these determinations, because as you go through the historical record, you will know that eventually, again, we were all Africans. But this is what this racist bastard had to say. Because we were seen as branching off as the part of, what's the best way I can say this? What's the best way I can say this without offending anyone? Because people start to lose their shit when we say we were apes. But that's just another classification which dealt with Homo sapien. Let me see if I can find this. Okay. So this is what he said. This is what he had to say. Although there was to be so great a difference between nations that you might easily take the inhabitants of the Cape. No, I don't want to read that. Yeah, let me read that. You might easily take the inhabitants of the Cape of Good Hope, the Greenlanders and the Caucasians, for so many different species of man. Yet, when the matter is thoroughly considered, you see that they all do so run into one another, and that one variety of mankind does so sensibly pass into the other, that you cannot mark out the limits between them. So he is um, admitting that we all came from one, but out of that process, he's saying that there was an evolutionary process that took place that eventually the last people to evolve were the Europeans, and because the Europeans were the last people to evolve, and they looking at the evolution as not as changing phenotypes or anything like that. They were saying that it was the European who, in as being the last people to evolve, or the last species to evolve, they were the ones who, in their evolution, demonstrated the greatest representation of the human species, i.e., they were the brilliant ones, they were the most, whatever other lies that they perpetuate on what this European supposed to have done, whereas all the other races were minor people. They were at the beginning. They were at the bottom of the rung, as I said earlier. So, but he made the reference or the distinction that African people were the first were the first link in the evolutionary process, so that when we evolved from out of the ape, or what we identify as the great ape, it was the African people that still resembles that evolutionary jump, which also included that because he identified us as the first species that evolved out of the great ape species. We also had minimal capabilities of thought. But this is also what this racist bastard had to say. He said, so load the table even more if you want to compare the ape to man. Add to it the relationships of organization, the similarities of temperament, the vehement appetite of male apes for women, the same conformation in the genitalia parts of both sexes, and the forced or voluntary interbreeding of negresses, Black women, with apes, the product of which has returned to one or the other species. He is saying that Black women can reproduce offspring by mating with apes. No other species could do this. He's saying that because Black women, Black men, Black women, but Black women in this particular, because this is where he's saying in his quote, Black women were closer related to the great ape species and had the capabilities of reproducing by mating with apes or monkeys. Is this beginning to spin a picture in your head with this impeccable research and this scholarly research that these people were doing regarding African people? Are you starting to see why these terminologies, these racial epithets were beginning to be placed on Black people and have still continued to be part of the lexicon when they were talking or demonstrating or discussing Black people behind closed doors? It was definitely not a mistake that Trump placed monkey faces on the bodies of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Now you're beginning to see why this was being done. This is part of their psyche, and it has been a part of their psyche, based upon the miseducation of their people. This is why they do not want true history being taught in the schools, because it begins to uncover the vile and vicious, uneducated, unscholarly behaviors and texts that they were putting together as early as the 1800s. And this was all done, well, I would say even before that, because they used certain beliefs to justify slavery. Moving on. I'm sorry for continuing to bump my mic. My apologies. Along comes behind Buffon comes Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. And Dr. LeGroux talks about Blumenbach in her book, and she also did a slide presentation on him. But this is what Johann Friedrich Blumenbach had to say. Let me see. Page 33, The Iceman's Inheritance. Blumenbach used the term race merely as a convenience. Still, it would be found serviceable to the memory to have constituted certain classes into which the men of our planet may be divided. Originally, then, the word race had no rigid or concrete scientific definition and few, if any, prejudicial connotations. This is Michael Bradley's statements. It reflected merely the common sense observation that all men were of the same species and yet exhibited certain readily discernible physical differences on a more or less geographical basis. It must be said at once that the term race still has no satisfactory scientific meaning. Yet the word has acquired connotations in the popular mind relating to differences in mental and biological worth, relating to superiority and inferiority, and not merely to the superficial physical differences in appearances. So rather than them identifying that these were physical differences that evolved based upon geographical locations, geographical areas, they had to take it one step further and say because they were part of this stock or this species called Homo europaeus, that they were the supreme being and that everyone else was inferior to them. How many people, just food for thought, and I'm gonna tie this in. Time is at 9:04. It's like I'll be here for a minute. How inhabitable would you believe or would you think it would be, or any species or any human species would be capable of living and thriving under ice? The hostile region and environment of living in a cold climate for centuries, millennium even, would contribute to the changing of the phenotype of the people who were living in those conditions. So their hair became straight. This is theory. It still hasn't been completely and solidified and concretely proven, but it's close to 99.9% factual. But if you're living in cold climates, your hair becomes straight. Your phenotypes change. And your skin color begins to leach out the protective chemical called melanin. Because melanin was a protective chemical that protected us from the UV rays in hot environments on the continent of Africa. So when the theory of out of Africa, where the first group of people walked out of Africa and ended up trapped in the ice, up in the ice age in the northern part of the Scandinavian parts of the world, which is identified as Europe and other Scandinavian countries, living underneath of that ice for centuries, they begin to lose the features that would identify them as African people or indigenous to the African continent. And we also we go go through these myths about these were certain parts of these high valued, high respected civilization, i.e., Kemet or Egypt, was at the hands of constructed at the hand by the hands of white men. Dr. Clark would say, how can you be so foolish into believing that white men had something to do with building the civilization of Egypt or Kemet, where there was no duplication done in the area where they claim they come from? And it was funny to me visiting that region, been there twice, how hot it is. And it's of course, a large tourist attraction. A lot of people come there from Europe. And one day we were visiting a temple, temple of Ep4, temple of Karnak, temple of Luxor. I think it was temple of Luxor. No, temple Karnak, I'm sorry. And it was about 110 degrees, no sun, no shade anywhere. And these people were passing out, thinking that they could tolerate the amount of heat and sun that was bearing down on their behinds. And we as African, we black folk from this country, we were looking at them like, you see, I mean, the law eventually catches up to you because you have had this idea in your history, in your history books, that the African people had nothing to do with the Egyptian civilization, that it was built by the hands of these highly evolved European people. And you're passing out all over the damn place because the sun is too hot for you. The scene was so amusing to us that there was, in the area of the temple, there was this small area. I mean, not small area, but there was an area, wide open space. And there was this one tree that was in the middle of this wide open space, nothing but desert. But there was this one tree. Man, it was about 50 of them piled up underneath of that damn tree, trying to escape from the heat of the sun. And again, we're looking at them and say, okay, well, the lie surely does eventually catch up to you. But anyway, where am I? So this is what Dr. DeGruy had to say about Mr. Blumenbach, page 44, post-traumatic syndrome. It's post-traumatic slave syndrome. I hope everybody's having fun, and I am. This is a rewarding topic to me, and doing the research. Of course, a lot of it is just me kind of stitching this information together. But I love being able to come in and put shows and things like this together, because particularly during this month, because we don't get this, we never got this in the schools. I said before, it's our responsibility it's our responsibility to teach our children our history, whether they want to teach the history, whether they want to teach the true history or not. It shouldn't be our problem. but it's our responsibility to teach our children, teach our history, the true history, the history that was put together, stitched together, researched by the great scholars that come before us, who put out copious amounts of books, scientific research papers, journals, and had written in journals, have been teaching in universities and colleges for decades. Dr. Du Bois, comes to mind, and one of the greatest scholars that this country ever produced. Dr. Hansberry, who was researching the history of Kemet long before anyone else was. By the way, while I'm on the subject, peace be upon Reverend Jesse Jackson for losing his life. In spite of some of the controversies that he had, he was definitely instrumental in the civil rights movement and the civil rights struggle throughout his entire life. So peace be upon him. And I just wanted to shout out and acknowledge his passing, and peace and love to his family. Send his prayers to his family, and that they get through this loss, and that the country gets through this loss, because he was very, as I said, he was very instrumental in a lot of things that had taken place through the civil rights era. William Leo Hansberry, who actually is the uncle of Lorraine Hansberry, who was the author and playwright of Raisin in the Sun. She had penned that play at an early age. She was in her 20s when she wrote that, when she put that play together. Raisin in the Sun, which was a Broadway musical, which eventually was turned into a movie that starred Sidney Poitier, Louis Gossett Jr. Who was other ones that were in Raisin in the Sun? Let me see. And again, I hope you all bear with me, because I'm stepping through this, and I want to make this I'm making this as interesting, this topic as interesting as I possibly can. But I want to, I'm dropping in information that as you leave here tonight, you can go out and you can do more research for yourself. So let me see who was part of that. Walter Younger, Ruth Younger, but Benita Younger. I think those are the ones that were actually in the play. I'm looking for the cast. Yeah, here it is. So with Sidney Poitier, Ruby Dee, Evan Dixon, Lon Elder, John Fiedler, Louis Gossett Jr., Claudia McNeil, Diana Sands, and Glenn Turman. So those were the stars in that movie. Beautiful movie. I mean, that movie was awesome. One of my favorites, and it was one of my favorites, or became one of my favorites, because it was one of my mother's favorites, and she would love Sidney Poitier, and she, of course, as a child, for us, she would have us sit down and watch those shows with her. But yeah, William Leo Hansberry was the uncle of Lorraine Hansberry. William Leo Hansberry was an excellent scholar. He was putting that work in, and studying Kemet before any of the other scholars were. He and also Dr. Du Bois. So going back, so this is what our beloved sister, Dr. DeGruy, had to say about Mr. Blumenbach. Mr. Blumenbach, like Linnaeus before him, liked adequate education and training, yet his work also gained prominence. Blumenbach received his medical degree from the University of Göttingen after submitting his 15-page long dissertation. The results of a one-year study with an older professor who owned an extraordinarily large and disordered natural history collection of skulls. Blumenbach also, along with scientific races of Britain and the United States, began to rank facial characteristics and skin color hierarchically, beginning, not surprisingly, with white as superior and most beautiful, thus identifying beauty as a scientific category. So they even took beauty as in ranking these different races. They took beauty as part of a classification, as a category. So one of the things that they were doing, and we know about the scientific method of measuring skulls, which is hilarious, because this was another method that was being used to determine who was more involved than others. They were using the measurements of skulls, and I thought I had this pinned out, but I'm gonna try to do this as best as I can through memory. Because they were saying, well, because the people's skulls, the bigger the person's skull was, the more intelligent they were. But even more ridiculous than that, measuring the size of a skull and making a determination or a declaration or assertion that because the skulls of these people were larger, then that meant their brains, the cavities of their that housed a larger brain capacity, which i.e. meant that they were more intelligent. They were also, went even a step further, they were collecting skulls, and they were saying because the skulls of the human remains were white, this concluded that because the skulls of the bones were white, this meant that the white man was the original person and all other races came behind him. And this was their science. Now you're seeing why it's such a travesty that we have to kind of deconstruct this information that has been seeded into the minds of people for centuries. And the only way you can even begin to deconstruct this information and tear down this racist narrative is to go into do the research that is necessary, which now they have taken upon themselves to begin to censor. Burning up books, taking books out of the library. 451 Fahrenheit degrees in every damn thing. I mean, they're burning metaphorically, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were burning those books. But they 451 in everything. Burning shit up because they want to keep this secret a secret. And they are pissed off that this information began to be leaked out by their scholars, by the way. It's talking about my people learn anything about that CRT. Talking about that CRT, them woke people. Being woke, teaching our children that CRT. Can't even tell you what CRT even meant. Or why it was being taught. And it was always being taught on a university level. But they associated CRT with everything. And this is their guilt running amok. I was part of one of my organizations I was with. We were set up at a event here in my hometown one year. And there was a table that was set up right beside us that had these little index cards printed up, and they was given the definition about racism and CRT. I mean, it was hilarious in itself. So one of the guys, one of the white guys, made a mistake and found his way in front of our table. Black revolutionary minded happened to find his way in front of our table and asking us questions about why did we, what literature did we have in place, why were we talking about what it was that we were talking about, why we were identifying racism, and we're talking about, of course, we're talking about the racist behaviors and the racist history of this country. We're also promoting reparations and some other things. And he happened to hand me a card that was talking about CRT. The interesting thing that the person who was also at this table, who were part of this organization, and of course, the name never stuck in my mind because I really didn't give a damn what the name of the organization was. But they had an Asian guy there. I think the Asian was one of the ones who formed or created the organization in the first place. I'm like, man, you talking about cognitive dissonance? You're talking about Stockholm syndrome? You're way out of bounds. I mean, this is part of your organization. You're talking about CRT. They're talking about banning CRT. That also includes your history. But their need to be able to want to be associated and identified with this European extended culture, that they've forsaken their own culture, their own rich culture, what they had to contribute to the world, just so that they can say that they are on board with not perpetuating something called reverse racism or reverse discrimination in the name of CRT. But I asked the guy, I said, what does CRT stand for? Can you define to me what CRT is? It's reverse racism. Like, dude, you better get away from our table before we embarrass you. But because they can't articulate it, he couldn't articulate it. The commentaries can't articulate what CRT is. The scholars can. You can go through the document, go through the text, go through the course study, and it lays out beautifully why they created the critical race theory and what it meant and what it means to the potential destruction of so-called American culture in American democracy. American Republic democracy. What the potential is of being able to, of having to stay married to the idea of this belief that white men are superior to everyone else, and how it is a national threat to the existence of this country. And they're not wrong, because you're starting to see the shit crumbling. And it's on a fast pace of destruction. I said that when you proudly vote as the president and the head of a state of your country, someone like a Donald Trump, you're scraping at the bottom of the barrel now. But the link that they had with him was, number one, his rhetoric, because he's one of the biggest salespersons in the country. I mean, he can sell you anything, whether it's a piece of shit or not. He can sell you anything. But this man had no experience or pedigree on how the governance structure is, but because he was talking about he wanted to uh, drain the swamp, which was a term that was probably spoon fed to him because he didn't know what the hell it meant. He didn't even know what build the wall meant. That was supposed to have been a metaphorical statement. He actually took it literal. When they were saying we need to build the wall, they was talking about putting up or creating immigration policies that would make it more difficult for people with brown skin to get into the country. That's what his architect, Steve Bannon, put together when he said we need to build a wall. But this idiot took it literally and said, okay, we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. They were like, you damn fool. What the hell are you talking about? But anyway, moving on. I lost my thought. Let's see, where are we? So after Blumenbach puts his 2 cents into this narrative called race, that starts to set the stage for opportunists to come in and begin to build this economic capitalist construct where they can begin to start padding their pockets with the riches. Of course, using us as a resource to be able to do this. And that, as I conclude and summarize this, you'll see where I was tying this in. So along comes a man. Let's see whether I make sure I have this on the slide presentation. Let me see. Yeah. Is it Richard Wiswall? I think he might have been second. Richard Oswald. Well, before I do that, let me do this. Before I go to Oswald, let me go here. So prior to, while they were putting together this idea about this false narrative about race, see, every now and again they would tell the truth. This again is Michael Bradley's book, The Iceman's Inheritance, Racism and Slavery. So he also says in the Racism and Slavery, he says, before the European expansion of the 15th century, there had not been a racial basis to world slavery since ancient proto-historic and historic invasions, with one exception, which was Europeans, because they were enslaving themselves as well. But in the efforts of anthropologists and opportunists circumventing the globe or navigating around the waters, this is what Paul Lejeune had to say. Paul Lejeune was a Jesuit priest from France. And you know that Europeans not only colonized this part of North America, they also colonized what is identified now and today as Canada. So this is what he had to say. This was in 1640. He said, I naturally compare our savages. He's talking about the savages of Europe. He said, I naturally compare our savages with certain villagers because both are usually without education. Then he says, though our peasants or savages, our peasants are superior in this regard, and yet I have not seen anyone thus far, or those who have come to this country, who does not confess and frankly admit that the savages in Canada, or what was the French colony at that point, they call it New France, and these people still don't have any respect, even when they come across other cultures or other people of the planet. They still didn't have any respect. They still identified other people as savages because they didn't think like they did, didn't dress like they did, didn't do the certain things that they did, or spoke, or did certain, had certain behaviors that the Europeans did. And I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna stick a pin in this, in that, and I'm gonna come back to kind of define what I mean by why they going around the world calling people savages. So he says, who does not confess and frankly admit that the savages are more intelligent than our ordinary peasants? So even the lie about people being far less intelligent than the Europeans, sometimes they will tell the truth. So his observation was, well, damn, they're more smarter than us, than our peasants. They're more learned than our peasants. So why are you calling them savages? Wasn't education supposed to be the measuring stick or the barometer that identified whether a person was evolved or not? And they have demonstrated to you that they were more intelligent than the stock of people who you came from, who you identify as peasants. They were far more intelligent than your people, but you still identify them as peasants. As savages. Going back to what I was saying in my relationship to my analogy when I was in Kemet, throughout the time where they were colonizing the lands in Africa, the tribes or the cultures or the villages, when they were colonizing our people, they identified the appearance of our people as savages based upon how we were dressing. So you in a climate where the temperature is on average 80 plus degrees, you're in the center or at the center of the equator, or a few degrees north or a few degrees south of that. And you're looking at how the people are dressed. And because they weren't walking around in wool suits in 100-degree weather, they were savages. Yet you walking around in clothing that is not conducive to you being in that environment at all, passing out on the damn ground because you're not accustomed to the heat. But you look at the people who have been accustomed to the heat for centuries, for millennia, since time immemorial, and this is how the weather dictates them to dress, and you're looking at them and calling them savages? You're looking at women with their breast out, and you begin to sexualize them, and you calling them savages? You can't control your urges, but yet you call them savages. Interesting. Richard George Oswald. He was apprentice. He was an apprentice to his cousins who were merchants in Glasgow, and the brothers of Richard Oswald of Scotstoun and Alexander Oswald, sons of a Reverend James Oswald. As a young man, Richard Oswald worked for them as a factor, traveling in America and the Caribbean In 1741, he became a partner in Glasgow firm. Now, if you go again and do research, pull up some of the research that Dr. DeGruy has done on post-traumatic slave syndrome. She talks about Richard Glasgow. I did some, Richard Oswald. I did some additional research on him. He was saying that throughout his time, he was able to amass a fortune that would equal $68 million in today's money through the slave trade. When they say he was a factor, he was employed as a factor. In being employed as a factor, even though the term is vague, factor meant trader. What was he trading? He was kidnapping and enslaved and trafficking. He was kidnapping and trafficking people on kidnapping vessels in the Americas and the Caribbean. You think they want to have this information out? You think they want to have this information leaked out into the history books? Because he wasn't the only one. Obviously, he wasn't the only one who was trafficking. Hell, they still trafficking. What you think? Look, the Epstein files. What the hell y'all think that's all about? They were trafficking little girls across the entire world. They've been doing this. This is nothing new to them. They've been kidnapping and trafficking people, illegally trafficking people throughout the entire world for centuries now. James Newton. Y'all familiar with James Newton? He penned the song Amazing Grace, which everyone within our family seems to love, and they're talking about how beautiful this song is. And they sing it at every opportunity that they can. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Or that's I can't remember how. Excuse me, Amazing Grace. How sweet it is to save a wretch like me. Let me make sure I got it, because it's not a song that I enjoy at all, especially with the historical reference. Yeah. How sweet the sound to save save a wretch like me. Why did he identify himself as a wretch? He wrote that on his deathbed. Prior to him writing this song and declaring himself as a wretch and being saved by the grace of God, he was a trafficker. He owned a ship and he made voyages back and forth between this country, or the 13 colonies at that time, in the United States. And he didn't have an empathetic conscience of what he was doing until he got sick. Let me take this down. He became terminally ill, and that's when he finally realized that what he was doing was immoral. And he called himself a wretch. Well, hell, the damage was done. You had trafficked hundreds of black-skinned humans across the waters to be sold as resources so that you can, number one, make the money off of your exploitation and continue on with the cycle of exploitation of African people in concentration camps. So now you ill, you want to confess your sins, because now you hope that you can be within God's grace and have a way into your heaven. This is what he had to say. He said, slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls, and thus are not destined for the next world. He went on to say that when the women and girls are taken on board a ship, trembling and terrified, they are often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey is divided upon the spot. Resistance or refusal will be utterly in vain. Then he says, I sinned with a high hand. Y'all think they want this information though? Do you think that because this information, these factually historical events documented in history, pulls the cover off the crimes that were committed against people not of European or white appearance, which has the potential of pulling the cover off of this so-called pristine, glorious history of this country? And all their heroes and their sheroes being exposed for the dirt that they were doing. And you'll think that is a coincidence. Excuse me, that is not a coincidence that they don't want this information being taught to their children. Because if their children are empathetic at all, if they are more empathetic than what their grandparents and their great-great-grandparents and their great-great-grandparents were, they're going to start asking questions. Hell, they already started asking questions. Did this really happen? Did our people really do this to them? You can't be teaching us to see our tape. That's against you're not a patriot. You can't be teaching that. You're hating our country. No, we're just telling you the truth. We're just pulling the cover off the shit that you were doing. And hopefully by you learning the truth, you will have some inkling of, you'll have some inkling of respect for yourself to start being able to do things that's going to change the layout of the entire country, where everybody has or is inclusive for and have the ability to have a decent living in this country, where they're not living continually and constantly under oppression, because you have in your mind and your thought process that you are a superior people and that you should be in control of everybody else. No, we're just telling the truth. And hopefully the truth is going to change your behavior. But it really doesn't look like you are interested at all. James Madison. You all hear a lot about the 3/5 compromise. James Madison. He was the one who orchestrated the 3/5 compromise. Remember, we were talking about, well, and this is although it is a misinterpretation of what the 3/5 compromise was. They were saying, well, black people were 3/5 of a human. No, they weren't meaning that we were 3/5 of a human. They didn't say that we were 3/5 of a human. They were saying the body of us collectively as a people would be accounted as 3/5 of a unit when during taxes and voting for representatives. See, they didn't want, those who were in the South wanted all the bodies to be counted those who were in the North said, no, you can't do that because they're not citizens, considered to be citizens of the country. They don't have any rights. They don't have any political or voter rights. So you can't count them as a people. So James Madison created this 3/5 compromise that says, well, we really can't do that because that means that if we can't count the people on these plantations, then they're going to run a Boston on the elections, and you're going to continue to control these. Now, of course, these were Republicans at the time who were making these claims. Those are in the South were Democrats, and we know that eventually it flipped where the Dixiecrats became the Southern Republicans, and all the others part of the Democratic Party were once the Republicans are now the Democrats, because it flipped. It flipped after it started to flip in the 1920s, but it particularly began to flip after the Civil Rights passed into law in the Civil Rights Act. But anyway, those in the South were saying, well, this gives us a greater chance to have representation in the House of in the House and in the Senate if we count our slaves. Hate using that term, but if we count our slaves as part of the population, and those in the North would say, no, you can't do that because you got your slaves aren't considered to be citizens. So James Madison created the 3/5 compromise. So that's how it became identified now that, okay, Black people are 3/5 of a human. Well, as long as it was a benefit to them, they were going to use us as a people to exploit as an exploitation to get what it was that they wanted. But fast forward to today, we have one of the greatest or the densest population of our people are in the South, particularly in the state of Mississippi. So you have Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, all these southern states where a majority of us as a people are concentrated, where we are eligible to vote, where we with our voting power have the ability to flip government houses, to flip Senate, U.S. Senate, and U.S. House of Representatives. We have that type of power that if we vote, and they know this. So when it was in favor of them to count us as the catalyst to bring them into power in the House of Representatives or to pay taxes, they were in favor of it. And now they're gerrymandering shit all over the place now. Voter suppression all over the place. Stop thinking that our vote don't matter. Stop that, please, please, please. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to suppress our vote. It's up to us to begin to use our vote wisely to get what it is that we need within our community. You can't participate in what is called a democracy if you don't vote. It took me years to come to that conclusion because I was the same person. I was saying the same thing. I didn't vote. If I vote, don't count. Well, how about now? Because you got Supreme Court justices that are riding with this mofo that's in the White House that has given him carte blanche to do any damn thing he wants. Well, send it up to the Supreme Court. The appellate courts are knocking down shit right and left, and he just continues to buy his time. He and his administration continues to buy his time until he can appeal it to the Supreme Court. The next thing you know, you got a 6-3 decision in favor of him doing shit that would have never had happened because you would have if you had voted in 2016. You would have had some representation on the Supreme Court that would have balanced the court where you won't see some of this crazy shit being passed are being passed through in legislation, or being challenged, or these laws being challenged and knocked down. They gutted the Voting Rights Act, and they're coming after the Civil Rights Act next. They'll appeal it to the Supreme Court, and they'll find a loophole. Anytime you are appealing a decision based upon birthright citizenship, which is law, and you're doing everything to weaken that until it gets to a point where you'll find a loophole that says, well, anyone with we can take away birthright citizenship from anyone other than unless you are European. And you don't think they would aren't devious enough to do that? The man violated every bit of the Constitution of the United States, where he said you cannot put soldiers on the streets and turn them against your citizens. He's done that. And you don't think if he stays in power, or someone who's even more cunning than him will go come into power and to run the same damn playbook? Fuck out of here. We need to wake up. So you talking about us suppressing our history, or not us, I'm sorry, our history being suppressed, and because they do not want to tell the true history of what has happened to us, not only to us as a people, but to the native people as well. How you destroyed two groups of people, completely eradicated, took every bit of knowledge that they had of their way of life, stripped from them, taught them, or forced your your Christian beliefs on them, and told and perpetuated an idea, or promoted an idea, or pushed an idea that said the only way you can be considered as not being savages is if you are accepted into the Christian faith, the Christian faith, or the Christian belief. That's the only way you're going to be able to be accepted into heaven, because everything else you do is evil. I talked about that 2 weeks ago. Go back and check that out. The Health Walk, episode 41. So you are censoring information now. And if you speak out against the behaviors that are beginning to bubble up in this country, so that you can be a voice of reason and sound the bell that says, no, you can't continue to do this because you are destroying the entire fabric of this nation. And we need to continue to tell the truth about what was done, because someone somewhere, someplace deep down inside of you, you have a moral compass. You have empathy somewhere that says we have to stop this craziness. Well, that doesn't fit their playbook. Remember, their purpose is to run and control every damn thing. And everybody else they consider to be second-class citizens. So you don't want to tell the history. Why not? Why don't you want to tell the history? Is it because your children will start asking questions about this? So this was a cartoon. I don't know when it was pinned, but the caption, and this is in Getty photos. Yeah, I swiped it. This is a little baby. This is them saying to the world, or those who are looking at this photo or this picture, that this is how Black children became dark. They were sucking out of cans or bottles of ink, and that's how they became. That's how we became dark people. Innocent, yeah, satire maybe, but it seeped into the minds of those who are less intelligent and unreasonable and incapable of critical thought. They look at this as amusing, but there was a show, um, and I was trying to find it. I used to watch Donahue when I was younger. He had some good shows, and he had a few of our scholars on, a few of our revolutionary-minded people on. Minister Farrakhan was on. Reverend Jesse Jackson was on. Donahue, they was on. Both of them was on quite frequently. Khalid Muhammad was on Donahue, and Dr. Welding was on Donahue, and I have a clip of her that I'm going to show. Naeem Akbar was on Donahue, but I remember vaguely that I believe it was when Dr. Welding and Dr. Naeem Akbar were on Donahue. They together. There was a white woman that stood up in the audience, and she was explaining. She said she had to explain something to her children. And they innocently do. This is something that's innocent through them because they're not aware. They're not even. Some of them not even cognizant of the type of rhetoric or speech that they have, based upon the thoughts that are coming out of their head because they've been conditioned to think this way. She had the mitigated gall to stand up in the audience and give her story of how she was explaining to her grandbaby or to her baby or whoever why black women, or excuse me, why black children are darker than her. She had the audacity to say that God left them in the oven too long. That's why they are darker than us. That within itself is appalling. You're saying that your skin color is more superior than or you're telling your grandbaby or your baby that her skin, his or her skin, is more superior than that black child because God made a mistake and left them in the oven too long. So you get photos or pictures like this, a little baby drinking black ink from a bottle, and that's how that baby became dark. Or you may be afraid to show them and tell them the story about this. This is recent. This is not, we're not talking about in the 1950s or the 1930s or the 1940s or the 1960s. This is recent. This is Serena. And they have her depicted where she's angry, jumping up and down and trying to portray her as being this angry black woman. But remember, we're not angry. We're not angry. I thought we were supposed to be phlegmatic. Isn't that what Carl Van Linus, Lanaya said? Didn't they say that we are phlegmatic? Which meant that we were incapable of showing emotion. Well, somebody lying somewhere. What is it? Are we phlegmatic or are we not? See, this is this is the so-called scholarship that seeped into the minds or into the books and into this education system that has been teaching this so-called curriculum for over 100 plus years now. So they portraying Serena Williams as looking at her features, beautiful woman, but they exaggerated her features to make her look like this monster, this tyrant on the court, having thrown a temper tantrum. So you want to keep that hidden, but maybe you're not wanting to show this. That would, where people will begin, or your children will begin to ask questions. Why are you spraying them with fire hoses? They're defenseless. Can you tell me a story behind this? What was going on here? What were you doing here? And you have to find a way to be able to tell this story to your babies or to your children after they have read or seen something or have been taught about this in their history class. You have to explain this to them. Why were you treating these people so cruelly? Why were you doing this, grandmom, mom? Why did our people do this? Why? So in order for you not to have to explain these circumstances to people, to your children who are asking questions, who are beginning to show that they have a sense of empathy, God, I hope they do. A moral compass, rather than you have to, excuse me, in order for you not to have to explain this to your babies, you rather hide the information. You rather not tell the truth. You want to censor the history. We got to tell the story of this pristine country and this beautiful country and how great and glorified this country was or is. And we need to bring it back. We need to make America great again. When was America great for Black people? Or maybe you're trying to keep this away from them. Strange fruit hanging from southern trees, as our sister Billie Holiday said. And you're standing in front of them taking pictures of this shit, having a picnic. You are amused that you can see two Black men swinging from a tree because of what lie that you had told or somebody had told that forced them to be hanged from a tree until they could no longer, until every bit of life was taken out of them. And you'd want to hide this because you don't want to tell this story to your babies. You want to keep this a secret because you have to continue to put up this facade that this country is this great country, pristine and clean, and you want to hide your dirty laundry. Or maybe you want to keep this out of the eyesight. Look at this picture here. Brother burned to a crisp. This brother here chained to a tree and whipped and beaten. Yeah, this is Black history. This is our history. But you having here, you having fun. You having a ball looking at this Black body being burned to a crisp. And you want to take photos. You want to memorialize this shit. What kind of sick mind do you have that you need to take a picture of a Black body being burned to a crisp just so that you can say you were there? You know damn well, in order for you to want to do something like this and not have a conscience at all, something had to be done that created the idea in your head that this can be done to another people, another human being. But the only way that you can accept this as a practice is if you have already destroyed the idea of black bodies being human. So yeah, you're mad. You want to hide this shit forever because your children are asking questions and they're out protesting and they want to learn about black history and they want to find out why we are so angry against the atrocities that were committed against us. So you want to find out why. They want to find out why we are fighting for reparations. They want to find out why we protest because another black man or another black woman has been shot down in the street unjustly. You want to find out why, or they want to find out why. And they're asking questions. And you don't have answers for them. So you're mad because you see this shit. You see it.
Slipping, slipping, slipping away.
Yeah. You're starting to see it slip away. So you beginning to reconstruct your power so that you can abate the shit that's bubbling up. When you got people like Steve Bannon threatening to put ICE agents at voter precincts because you don't want people to vote. You have news commentators pissed off because black women and not necessarily even black women or black men, white men and white women are beginning to stand up and protest, and you're saying you're not supposed to be doing that. Don't you know you are of the white race? Don't you know that you're superior? No, they see themselves not as superior, they see themselves as human. And they're seeing the injustice that's being acted on another people, on another human. And they're saying this shit has to change. Why did they shoot Renee Good? She wasn't doing anything. And what's the other dude's name? I can't remember his name. But y'all know that they took out a brother in California, in Oakland or San Francisco, even a week prior to that happening on New Year's. No, a undercover ICE agent came out and just shot him. Those mass protests that took place in 2020 when George Floyd was killed and Breonna Taylor was murdered. A lot of those demonstrations were led by white people because they've seen enough. They've seen the shit that has continued to beat a drum in this country time and time and time and time again. And they're saying this shit has to change. But it changing means that you will lose your control and your idea that you're perpetuating that you are being this superior people. And it also means that if you start to allow this to be a nation that truly believes in the idea of a nation of free people who are with the righteous means to allow other people within the world community to come in and participate in this so-called experiment called democracy, if you truly do that, where you're less than 25% of the population, everybody else in the entire world is people of color. If you don't shut down your borders, you're going to get annihilated. You're going to be genetically wiped out, and you are afraid of that. They've been talking about this since what, since 1980s, 70s, maybe, perhaps. That the demographics of the country is changing. You don't think it was a coincidence that they become aggressive in these abortion laws? They weren't concerned about abortion when Black women were having abortions. But when white women started having abortions, whoa, time to stop. Time to change the laws. You're aborting our babies and we are dying. Our race is dying. Isn't that what Elon Musk was talking about last year? White women need to have more babies. You need to have more babies. You need to have more babies. Our population is dwindling and you are letting these brown people in and they're genetically wiping us out. Stop the borders. Don't let people color in. And the idea of genetic annihilation was something that Dr. Welsing was talking about when she had written the book, the ISIS papers, the crest theory, and that people laughed at her. People laughed at her scholarship. She had the skill to sit down and do an observation as a social psychologist, medically trained psychiatrist, doing an analysis on the behaviors of white men and women in this country. And she wrote her theory based upon particularly the fear that white men had, that it could lead to an influx of brown people migrating and reproducing in this country could lead to genetic annihilation, and people laughed at her. This was her on Donahue.
Paper talking about the decline of Western populations.
Yeah, here's the Washington Post, just to name one. We are a depopulation bomb, the withering of the Western world. This is where we'll be less than 10% in the year 2075. Here's where we are about today, 15. So we're not having babies.
So whites are not having babies, and there is the concern about white genetic annihilation. In other words, I look at, this is Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday holiday, and people will say, well, here's a man who talked about love. Yeah. Why was he killed? And I say that the deeper logic is, what if all black and white people and non-white people and white people love? What would happen to white people? White would disappear. You see, just mix all of the people on the planet up together.
In other words, if race didn't matter, or if color didn't matter, it follows with the jet planes.
No, I'm not saying if it didn't matter. I'm saying that indeed if there was a mingling of all of the people, because
that's what I'm saying.
Okay, fine.
Absence of prejudice.
The ability, no, wait, don't confuse what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we mixed all of the people presently on the planet, stirred them up,
the white freckle-faced people would be gone.
Genetic recessive status would disappear.
So she was saying that in the 80s and the 90s, I think it was the 80s when she appeared on Donahue for the first time, and she was promoting her book, The Crest Theory, ISIS Papers, The Crest Theory. So it's 2026 now. Fast forward to 2026. This is Eric Schmidt. I played this last year. This is Eric Schmidt.
The Continental Army soldiers dying of frostbite at Valley Forge. The Pilgrims struggling to survive in the hard winter soil of Plymouth. The pioneers striking out from Missouri for the wild and dangerous frontier. The outnumbered Kentucky settlers repelling wave after wave of Indian war band attacks from beyond the stockade walls. All of them will be astonished to hear that they were only fighting for a proposition. They believed they were fighting for a nation, a homeland for themselves and their descendants. They fought, they bled, they struggled, they died for us. They built this country for us. America, in all its glory, is their gift to us, handed down across the generations. It belongs to us. It's our birthright. It's our heritage, our destiny. If America is everything and everyone, then it is nothing and no one at all. But we know that's not true. America is not a universal nation. It is something distinctive, unique, and real, unlike any other place or people in the history of mankind.
Yeah, I heard enough. So America was built for them. Their forefathers came and built this for them. It belongs to them, and it belongs to them only. Did you steal this land? From Native people? And you exercise this idea called manifest destiny to justify you taking the land from the Native people? Remember what Linnaeus said about African people? Lazy and shiftless. Trump's latest visa pause targets 75 countries he thinks are lazy. A thinly coded policy locks out nationalities at high risk of public benefit usage. This was in Mother Jones, January 26th. So while he's out acting a buffoon, as he normally does, or as he always does, behind closed doors, they're creating policies that are locking out immigrations from people who are coming from countries of color, because he wants to open up the borders for those who are coming from, what do you say? Holland. I mean, he didn't even mention the regular countries. He was talking about areas up in Scandinavia. You know, why can't they begin to let those? Why can't we have those people come in? You mean, why can't we have white Europeans or Europeans who identify as white? Why can't we have them come in more easily? We don't want people from shithole countries coming into our country. We want people with white skin or identified as white skin to come in. That way we can boost our population, because our population is dwindling, and they see this shit. They see it.
Slipping away.
Trump nominates an apostle of white erasure for the State Department. I don't know if I saw this. It was all over. I mean, this is the article, but they had this on C-SPAN, CNN, MS Now, on PBS. I mean, they had this hearing on this. This dude, Jeremy Carl, President Trump's nominee to lead the State Department outreach to international organizations, and a rough confirmation hearing. Had a rough confirmation hearing, but he stood by his views on whiteness. I mean, they grilled him because they were trying to get him to admit that he has this idea of this shrinking population identified as white, as the white race. Dr. Welsing talked about this in the 1980s, and people laughed at her. Those who were in that audience, I mean, even the people in our own community was saying that the research that she did was quackery. It was unjustifiable. There's no way that she could put together a theory like this. This was reverse. Even we latched onto the terminology. This is reverse racism. We don't even listen to our own damn scholars when they try to tell us the thing that is the thing. They try to tell us the thing that's the thing, but we still don't listen to. We still don't listen to them. But she laid it down because they are afraid of losing the grip and control that they've had on this country as the so-called superior power and controller and ruler of the people in this country. They see this shit.
Slipping away.
So they need to find the most disgusting, foul, racist people that they can find to put in an administration to stand at the guard and be the blocks while they try to reconstruct this thing that keeps them in favor, keep them in power. So this man, Jeremy Carl, is at a Senate hearing because he's up for confirmation for the State Department. And listen to what this man said.
Carl, I'll follow up a little bit. You gave a speech to the National Conservatism Conference in July of 2024 entitled On the Persecution of Whites in America, and one of the things you said was American whites are victims of a cultural genocide. A cultural genocide. Where to start? So you'd agree with me, wouldn't you, that whites are pretty well represented in the United States Senate?
They are well represented in this body, yes, Senator.
And how about in the House of Representatives?
Senator Kane, I don't have those particular numbers. However,
But you would agree that they're pretty well represented in the House of Representatives.
Senator, I would, again, thank you for the question. I would point out that there were no white Protestants by birth in the 25 cabinet members under Joe Biden.
How about in the ranks of American presidents throughout history, including now, pretty well represented?
Let me pause this. But did you hear what he said? He said white Protestants. So he even excluded, he was saying, well, I'm not accepting any Catholics as them being purebred white people. Catholics aren't. Protestants are the stock. They are the people, white Anglo Protestants who came from Europe, who came from who came from Britain. Those are the ones who should be identified as white. Excuse me. Those are the ones identified as white. And if you don't have those white people in your areas of power, in your areas of education, of commerce, or in your governance structure, if you don't have them, if you don't have the white Anglo Protestants in your governance structure, then white people are underrepresented. That's underrepresented. That's what he was saying when he said there weren't any Protestants in Joe Biden's cabinet. Joe Biden's a Catholic. So I guess that was an indictment on all Catholics because Joe Biden didn't choose any WAPs, any white Anglo Protestants on his cabinet.
Whites?
Senator.
And how about in the ranks of vice presidents during American history? Now, whites pretty well represented in that group, right?
Senator, thank you again for the question.
Yeah. I don't think it's hard. How about on the United States Supreme Court? Throughout our history and including now, whites are pretty well represented on the United States Supreme Court, correct?
Senator, will you permit me an opportunity to finish my answer? I think obviously historically, I would of course agree with you. Of course, the vast majority of Americans were white at that time. It's now a much more diverse society.
Let's focus on right now. How about
Right.
in the ranks of American governors? You think whites are pretty well represented?
Senator, thank you for that question. I would just have to look at the numbers. I don't know.
Okay, how about
offhand.
this? In the ranks of CEOs of major corporations today, let's not talk about today. You think whites are pretty well represented?
Senator, thank you for the question. I suspect that they are probably pretty well represented in that, but there are other areas where they're not as well.
How about in the ranks of high-income people? And we can define it however you want. Let's just say like top 10% of wealthy Americans. You think whites are pretty well represented?
Senator, thank you for the question. They would certainly be underrepresented with respect to Asian Americans, but they would be overrepresented with respect to other groups.
Yep.
And y'all think that we're lying. Y'all think that we are being hyperbolic when we're telling you what's right in front of our face. This is what he had to say. I didn't show the whole clip because, I mean, it's basically rehashing the same thing. So Clyde McGrady, he's the one who had written this article. So he said, Jeremy Carl, President Trump's nominee for a senior State Department post, struggled at his confirmation hearing on Thursday to answer what should have been an easy question since he wrote an entire book about it. What is white identity and why is it under threat? After nervously rambling about white food and black food, white music and black music, and white worship styles, Mr. Carl told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that a loss of dominant white culture is weakening the country. What did I say?
Slipping, slipping, slipping away.
So they don't want to teach history. They don't want to teach the history because it's a threat to their power. It's a threat to their rulership. It's a threat to the lie that they've been living for centuries now. And they're seeing the country. I guess the moral compass of the country is just starting to pick up just a bit, but they're going to do everything they can do to beat it back. Let me close. And I thank you all for staying with me. I didn't think it was going to be 2.5 hours, but I appreciate you all. I love you guys. I love you all for hanging in here with me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I got to get up at 5 o'clock, 4:30 tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock. I got to travel to Virginia for a meeting. And I'm up here with you all. I love you guys. Ruins of Empire. C.F. Volney, Count Volney. He had written several books, but in this book, he's talking about the behaviors of man, and because of the way we interact with each other and our disrespect for each other based upon categories of race is destroying the world. This is what he had to say. Sources of evils of society. Page 25, Ruins of Empire. In truth, scarcely were the faculties of men developed, which gratify the senses. They gave themselves up to unbridled desires. The sweet sensations which nature had attached to their real wants to endear. To them, their existence no longer satisfied them. Not content with the abundance offered by the earth or produced by industry, they wished to accumulate enjoyments and coveted those possessed by their fellow men. The strong man rose up against the feeble to take from him the fruit of his labor. The feeble invoked another feeble one to repel the violence. Two strong ones then said, why fatigue ourselves to produce enjoyments which we may find in the hands of the weak? Let us join and despoil them. They shall labor for us, and we will enjoy without labor. And the strong associating for oppression, and the weak for resistance, men mutually afflicted each other, and general and fatal discord spread over the earth, in which the passions, assuming 1,000 new forms, have generated continued chain of misfortunes. Thus, the same self-love, which moderate and prudent was a principle of happiness and perfection, becoming blind and disordered, was transformed into a corrupting poison and cupidity. Offspring and companion of ignorance became the cause of all the evils. That evil desolated the earth. Cupidity is greed, by the way. Yes, ignorance and cupidity. These are the twin sources of all torments of man. Blasted by these into false ideas of happiness, he has mistaken or broken the laws of nature in his own relation with external objects, and injuring in his own existence, has violated individual morality, shutting through his heart to compassion and his mind to justice. He has injured and afflicted his equal and violated social morality. From ignorance and cupidity, man has armed against man, family against family, tribe against tribe, and the truth is becoming a theater of blood, of discord, and right pain, or rape. This book was written in the 18th century, so they use words that are no longer in the language. So rapine means definitely basically means rape. By ignorance and cupidity, a secret war fermenting in the bosom of every state has separated citizen from citizen, and the same society has divided into itself, into oppressors and oppressed, into masters and slaves. By these, the heads of nations, sometimes insulated and audacious, have forged its change within its own bowels, and mercenary avarice has funded political despotism. Sometimes hypocritical and cunning, they have called from heaven a lying power, and sacrilegious yoke, and credulous cupidity, and founded religious despotism. By these have been perverted the ideas of good and evil, just and unjust, vice and virtue, and nations have wandered in a labyrinth of errors and calamities. The cupidity of man and his ignorance. These are the evil genii which have wasted the earth. These are the decrees of fate which have overthrown empires. These are the celestial anathemas which have smitten the walls once so glorious, and converted the splendor of a populous city into a solitude of mourning and ruins. But as the bosom of man has sprung all the evils which have afflicted his life, there has also to seek and to find the remedies. Finishing up with the Iceman's inheritance, concluding with what Michael Bradley had to say, basically the same thing. So he says, Western culture so thoroughly permeates the world, and even opposition to it realizes on Western philosophies. Western culture, white man's culture, is almost totally and exclusively the product of mind and motivation of one race of mankind, the Caucasoids. Because we constructed this edifice in our own psychobiological image, we naturally considered it both good and superior. And once becoming into a significant contact with men of other races, we searched about for some mechanism to explain our goodness and superiority. Quite naturally, we assume that we must have superior amounts of some good characteristic. We banked on it a superior intelligence, but the concept is bankrupt. It has only been since the end of World War II that Western man has come to doubt seriously and sincerely his values and his works, and only because both have evolved to the point where they threaten his own survival. We are suffering from the resource shortages, pollution, nuclear, racist, and sexist traumas and nightmares. They are specters of our own Caucasoid psychobiology. That cannot be denied, even to ourselves, because just before these aspects of contemporary world passed some threshold of critical mass and became threats, we proudly took credit for the attitude and technology which spawned them, precisely because we are threatened by our own works and values and are slowly beginning to remove our rose-colored spectacles in the interest of survival and clear vision. We may now be ready to accept the fact that we Caucasians are neither good nor superior. In fact, perhaps we have reached the point where we might be able to reach agreement among ourselves that we may possess superior amounts of a bad characteristic compared to all other men. This book is a racist book because I believe that history shows that men can be divided into two divisions on the basis of significant characteristics. There are Caucasoids and everybody else. The significant characteristics shared unequally by these two groups is aggression. Our works and our values reflect aggression. Our technology is aggression directed against the natural world. Our unexcelled in military technology is aggression directed against our fellow human beings. Much of art and our culture reflects sexual aggression. We are always right. We are different, just as always suspected. Only now the results of this difference don't seem too good, intelligent, or superior. Our conceit is bankrupt, or at least seriously overdrawn, and maybe we're ready to do some objective racial accounting. This significant difference between, the significant difference between ourselves and other men, our racially highest level of aggression, must be explained if we are to deal with it. We differ from other men in one other respect. Of all major groups, only Caucasoids cross the sapiens or the sapiens threshold in a glacial environment. It is my contention that the rigors of this rite of passage traumatized us because we were in the ice, because we crossed out of Africa into Europe, ended up in an ice age for centuries, and developed aggression against all of the people on the face of the earth. Thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed this subject. It is what it is. I'll be back here tomorrow with the health walk with my special guest. This is part of the Healthy Eating in the Hood series. Sister coming in from Cameroon. She owns a restaurant here in Frederick called Motherland Kitchen. And we're going to have this discussion about the healthy preparation of African foods, African cuisine in a healthy way. Come back here 7:30 tomorrow Eastern Time, live on the Health Walk, Facebook and YouTube. I would love for you to be back in the space, be back in the building, because I will be here. And I appreciate you spending this time with me tonight. Until we meet again, walk from this space in love, walk from this space in peace. You be that man, that man and that woman in the mirror and make that change. You be the change that you want to see in the world. Until we meet again tomorrow, 7:30 Eastern Time, live on the Health Walk. Peace and love all the time.